let's talk about Sinn Fein, Shawn Fain. In your
Yes.
article, you
Yeah.
describe Shawn Fain as a transformative figure within the UAW,
Yes.
particularly due to his role in securing a significant labor victory against the big three automakers. You wrote, Fain, unlike many of his predecessors, seems willing to directly confront corporate power and break with the conciliatory unionism of the past. How do you think Fain's leadership differs from that of his predecessors? And what does this suggest about the future of labor militancy?
Yeah. So I think there are really two different issues here. One is about Shawn Fain as somebody who is intervening in national politics, like the DNC speech, which was the original context, and then the other is wow, Shawn Fain's role in the UAW, and I think they're both really impressive and they're both really helpful. And as far as the UAW goes, the first thing to note about the difference between him and his predecessors is I think you actually said this in your intro, but just to circle and underline the point, Fain was actually the first directly elected head of the UAW, right? One member, one vote. Everybody gets to vote on it, and he came in as the candidate of this reform caucus, which, as you said, is now called UAWD, Unite All Workers for Democracy, which swept that election, but is still sort of very much in the process of trying to consolidate that kind of rank and file takeover of the union, right? So there's an article I did not write, but I would recommend. It came out a couple days ago by Keith Brower Brown and Jane Slaughter, called the UAW's rank and file takeover isn't over yet, where they get into a lot of the internal politics of this. But basically, I think the UAW, is in a state of steady decline for a long time, in a lot of ways. And there's this old guard that ran the union for a very long time. There were certainly issues with corruption, and to be clear, right? I mean, that hasn't disappeared or anything, but that's part of the reason for the Reform Caucus. And there's certainly an issue about, you know, collaborationism essentially with management, with people who are these old guard union officials who've been around forever, who have way too cozy a relationship with management. And the third issue, which is closely related to that one, has been these concessions that the UAW has made over recent decades, which often involve two-tiered contracts where people who have been around for a long time, they're grandfathered in, get the better, wages and benefits and protections,
Mhm.
and people who are coming in now, right, end up getting the worst one, right? That's often the compromise that okay, we'll give you the concession, but only for new people.
Mhm.
And so, UAWD really came in to say, okay, no to the corruption, to the two-tier contracts, and more sort of direct participatory rank and file involvement. And I think that to sort of make good on that and to kind of do what they could to consolidate that, they really had to go after the big automakers in a big way to show that they meant business, and to kind of prove that it wasn't all just bullshit for the union election, that they really were going to take on these companies in a different way. And I think it's this has happened in a pretty remarkable way, right? I mean, like just for context here, certainly about my own perspective about this, I grew up in mid Michigan. It's to a very great extent, I feel like the version of mid Michigan that I grew up in was shaped by those past, by the sort of past UAW victories way back when. My certainly, my family had been very involved in the UAW in the past, and this is something I grew up very aware of. And so it's really striking to me to look at what's happened in the last year, right? That there was the stand-up strike where they took on, I think, for the first time in the history of the union, they went on strike against all three of the big three automakers at once. And they did this, which is just, again, it's unprecedented. And they did the strategy that I've got to say, I saw some leftists doing sort of, I don't know. I don't know what you would call it, but it's like it's not Monday morning quarterbacking, because that would be what you do later. But it's like, whatever the version of that at the time is, right?
Right. Some finger wagging.
Yeah, some finger wagging, some quarterbacking for the couch, right? Where they were like, oh, this is the wrong strategy because the way they were doing the stand-up strike, not everybody was going out at once, since they would shut down certain plants. But part of the reason for that is so they could stretch out the strike funds longer, and so I saw I don't know, like there's a group called Socialist Alternative, people might be familiar with. I saw they were like very critical of that, et cetera. And I would just say, proof's in the pudding. It really seems to have worked. And then the organizing victory in the South that you mentioned earlier, I think is really striking, is really good, just both in itself and also for the symbolism of that, right? For showing that can be done, right? That this is not just a region that's totally impervious to that, because in the past it kind of has been, and so I think that's the context, right? And also I should say, I really enjoy that he made Jim Cramer lose his mind.
I was going to say Jim Crow, but yeah, Jim Cramer, tomato.
The collective spirit of Jim Crow.
When I think of Jim Cramer, I think of Jim Crow. I think he would love those separate markets.
I mean, look, I don't love Jim Cramer. I don't really think he has the accent to be the spirit of Jim Crow.
You didn't notice how Jim Crow sounds like a Yank? Like a fucking Yankee. That's Jim Crow for you in a nutshell.
But yeah, he was, like there are these famous clips of Jim Cramer ranting about how Shawn Fain scares him because the class war rhetoric. He compared him to Earl Browder, which is like really a red baiting deep cut, right? I mean, that was
and it's something that no one fucking knows. What is it with these people that like, was it Chris Matthews is like Bernie Sanders is gonna
oh yeah, Chris Matthews.
We're all gonna be hung because we like to have Nike shoes.
Yes.
What is it about this who was getting hung for Nikes in Mao's China?
I don't know, man. But yes, I believe that the Chris Matthews thing, and granted, I know I'm having trouble sorting out in my head what Chris Matthews actually said for Michael Brooks's impression of him, but
it was something about being strung up and
yeah.
What was it, Toussaint? What did he say again?
So I think they were going to shoot people in Central Park. Right?
You're going to shoot people in Central Park.
It was like Birdie reminds him of these like people he used to see selling like Trotskyist newspapers, and they love Castro, and they're rooting for the Reds in the Cold War. That was the phrase he used. And if they'd succeeded, maybe they'd be like rounding people up and shooting them in Central Park, which is like, I mean, if there was ever a time for that meme, with the sad face, I just want healthcare.
I feel like anyone that refers to communists or anyone having some sort of communist sentiment as a red, you definitely said the N-word in public when it was fashionable. Like you said, nigga Joe, please pull the car around. And I feel like Chris Matthews